Fire Emblem Gaiden, the second game in the series. It may somewhat follow the black sheep archetype that a Nintendo series sometimes go through, like, Zelda and Zelda 2, Mario Bros. 2, Metroid 2, all that kind of stuff. But either way, though, it's not like incredibly different. It's just it approaches things slightly differently in terms of how it's set up. But ultimately, it still has a lot of the DNA of the previous game. Just there's more battles instead of it being chopped up by dialogue and other little things. But either way, though, of course, this game came out on the Famicom, even though the Super Famicom had released over a year ago. But yeah, so that definitely still put some limitations on the story and how much they could actually fit into the game. But either way, though, regardless of that, there are a lot more, battles without dialogue and stuff. This gives it, I guess, more of a feel of more of a proper war, a proper progression, so to speak, going from all these different battles. And yeah, it feels more like a grind, which this game also has. You can pretty much grind in dungeons and stuff to level up your characters, outside of the main battles. And yeah, that's certainly a different approach they took with this game. And there are a couple other things like magic draining your HP or the whole one inventory slot thing that are kind of weird. But either way, though, ultimately, story, again, not super overly complex. It's very straightforward, so let's get into it. So in the opening text, we see that there is the continent of Valentia, and there's two nations on it, Rigel and Zofia. In the south, Zofia, ruled by Milla, is a generally land of peace, and allowing yourself to generally pursue general happiness and pleasure and stuff like that. While in the north, there's Duma, who generally values power and hates corruption and stuff. And ultimately, Milla and Duma, they clash, their siblings and stuff, but they do have obviously clashing ideologies, and the people would come to be somewhat reflections of them. And eventually, though, even though they were able to live apart from each other, eventually they just couldn't coexist. And there were many contradictions and such and eventually war would begin to stir. And, well, luckily, though, there were two, children who were born not too long ago that are said to reverse the cogs of fate, so to speak. So, yeah, let's head over there. So the first child is now a young man. His name is Alm, and he lives in Ram Village. And there's this guy called Lucas who's apparently trying to recruit General Myson for their little liberation army. General Myson is Alm's caretaker, and Alm believes Myson to be his grandpapa, but ultimately, yeah, Myson is a very renowned former general of Zofia, but he doesn't want to take part in this war. And so Lucas, of course, wants to recruit other members for the Liberation Army, and Alm is more than willing to step up. And along with his friends Tobin, Cliff, and Gray, they all head off, and they get into some skirmishes along the way with some bandits, and eventually infiltrate a shrine and rescue a young maiden, a young cleric, who can heal wounds and stuff inside of the shrine, which also houses a Milla statue. And the Milla statue allows your army units to upgrade their classes, and that's pretty nice. But either way, though, they head up and they head to a little outpost where they rescue Claire, who's a noble of Zofia, and then Claire is the sister of Clive, who's the leader of the Liberation Army. So eventually they head out to the Deliverance hideout, which is crawling with monsters that can be defeated to gain battle experience. But either way, they infiltrate further into their hideout, and they eventually find Clive, who actually wants to turn the Liberation Army, the leadership of the Liberation Army over to Alm, as he believes Alm to be quite strong, and thanks him for saving his sister and stuff. And yeah, so now Alm is officially the head. And after a little bit of time, Alm eventually heads to Zofia Castle and takes it back from Desai, so to speak. And yeah, Desai, of course, he is he was the one who led the rebellion. He was a noble of Zofia, but obviously he betrayed the king, and it looks like he killed him. So Alm and friends hopefully drive him off back to his lands, and Alm for now, and all the rest of his friends rejoice in their victory. But either way, though, Sir Myson is also there for some reason, and Myson is trying to prepare Alm for all the struggles of war, and warns him of all his perils and all the other things that are going to stand in his way. And Alm braces himself, and he takes Myson's word into account. Either way, though, that's the end of Act 1. Now we're heading on to Act 2, where we meet the other child of fate, and that is Celica. Celica has grown up on the island of Novus, and she's lived in the priory here with Noma. And apparently, according to Noma, Celica is the last of the Zophian royal family. And she was also placed here by Sir Myson, of course, which is also Alm's caretaker. But either way, Celica, she's leaving because, well, they haven't been able to grow crops in Zofia for 3 years, and Celica, assumes that something must have befallen Milla for this to happen, so she wants to go to investigate, and Noma can't stop her, so he does allow her to go, along with her friends. May, Bowie, and Jenny, they can all use magic, so that's cool. But either way, they head off, they fight some monsters at the local graveyard, and then eventually they head to the town, where they try to find someone who is not so reliant on magic in general fights and stuff. And they find Saber, a local legendary mercenary who Celica wants Saber to escort all of her friends here to Milla's temple in Zofia. Of course, they are on an island, so they will have to travel by boat to get there first. So either way, though, they will have to deal with some pirates along the way. And apparently the locals talked about these pirates causing a bunch of trouble for people out at sea and stuff, and it's made trade really hard. And eventually Celica and friends, after fighting a couple of skirmishes with pirates, eventually land on the pirate island, the pirate leader's island, and they find his little base here. His name is Garth, and eventually they defeat him. And there's also some other people who are also fighting Garth, and once you talk to them after your little battle, you can recruit them, because one of the combatants, whose name is Valbar, his family was killed by the pirates, and he obviously wanted to get revenge, so he's going to pay back Celica by joining her army, along with Leon and Kamui as well, who are loyal to Valbar. But either way, they head on and fight a couple more pirate skirmishes, but they can also do an excursion to an island that has a dragon shrine, and that has some treasure in it and stuff like that. Either way, though, eventually they arrive on the mainland of Zofia, and there they encounter Pala and Katria, of course, who were from Arcanea in the previous game. But either way, they're looking for their sister Est, and Celica leaves them for now, but either way, she heads to Zofia Castle just to check out the situation. Obviously, she heard about the Liberation Army, and she wanted to know who the leader was. And eventually, she finds out who the leader was from Sir Myson. And Sir Myson tells Celica directly that Alm is leading a resistance effort against the kingdom of Regal, as well as Desay. And Celica is a little bit disappointed by this, the fact that Alm is being a little bit of a warmonger, so to speak. But either way, Celica and Alm did grow up a little bit when they were little in Ram Village, but either way, though, they did grow a little bit of a nice relationship there, but they haven't seen each other in a while. And Celica is clearly on the side of peace, while Alm is willing to fight back and protect the people of Zofia to the best of his ability. Either way, the two can't see eye to eye, and eventually they part on a little bit of a sour note. Either way, though, with the precedent set, we head and continue with the rest of the game into Act 3. In Act 3, you can control Alm and Celica's army simultaneously. You can either do Celica or Alm's battles first, or you can kind of go one by one. Celica battle 1, then Ulm battle 1, and then Celica battle 2, Ulm battle 2, etc., etc. Either way though, we're following Ulm here first, and Ulm's first order of action is to get rid of Desay. And yeah, so they do a couple little skirmishes, and eventually they reach Desay's lands and his fortress, and Desay is unwilling to surrender or take any prisoners, so... Well, actually he did take a prisoner. He took Matilda, who was Clive's wife, and yeah, he's using archers to shoot her as a warning message to Ulm and friends not to approach the fortress. Either way though, he had to fight Desay's goons, and eventually break into the fortress and defeat Desay himself, who was very bulky, and not an easy target to get a headshot on. But either way, Ulm and friends eventually do defeat him and rescue Matilda, hopefully, if you get there in time. But either way, also inside Desay's fortress is the royal sword, which can only be wielded by royal family members. And apparently Ulm can actually wield this sword, which might indicate that he is actually a royalty, though Ulm never actually knew about this, so it's kind of a mystery. But either way though, they eventually head out of Desay's fortress, and yeah, they do a little bit more battles. They also encounter a new shrine called the Sylvan Shrine, which is a little bit creepy, but either way though, they eventually get up to the Sluice Gate, which is right on the border between Rigel and Zofia. And there is an arcanist called Tatara. Now Tatara is part of the Duma cult, so to speak. Now the Duma cult is a group of people who serve Lord Duma, and they generally specialize in dark magic and, as you can see here, mind control. And apparently Tatara is mind controlling this young girl named Delthea. We met Delthea's brother back in a village later back, but either way though, yeah, he's taking control of her mind and using her to fight against Ulm. She's very strong, even though she's very young. Either way, defeat Tatara and save Delthea from his clutches, and she'll join Ulm's army. But yeah, so at the Sluice Gate, Ulm realizes that he needs to open the Sluice Gate to you know, get the water flowing and make you know, the border to Rigel actually passable. But the problem is that there's also another Sluice Gate further east near the Milla Temple, where Celica is headed. And we need both you know, Sluice Gates opened at once for the water to actually flow. So either way, let's head over to Celica and see what she does. Celica and friends did experience an earthquake earlier, but it looks like they're okay. But either way, it's forced them onto the coast, and there they fight some bandits, and they realize Pal and Catria are fighting them as well, so they hopefully save them. Then Celica can talk to Calla and Patria, or Pal and Catria, and they can, you know, join Celica's army to search for Est. And in the meantime, Celica fights some more monsters, and then she goes west to recruit another villager named Atlas, who's quite eager to save his brothers. And it looks like everything's pointing towards out east, where Grief's citadel is. Grief is apparently the big bandit leader of Zofia, so to speak, and yeah, he's caused quite a bit of trouble for the villages, and he's also, you know, involved with the pirates and stuff, so Celica and friends want to take him out. So first they deal with one of his goons. They rescue a mercenary named Jesse, who tells them that they could either head north to deal with Dean or south to deal with Sonia. Both of them are technically Grief's lackeys, though he believes that if you fight one, then the other won't come pursuing you, and they'll instead flee. So you can either choose to fight Dean or Sonia, and yeah, the other one will head running off. Either way, win that battle, and eventually Celica gets to Grief's citadel, and yeah, it's a long and arduous battle, but eventually Celica is able to defeat the very dreaded dread fighter known as Grief. But either way though, yeah, you're also able to recruit either Dean and Sonia, whichever one you didn't fight. They will join Celica's army, and also retrieve Est, who was locked up in the basement of the citadel. And also inside is a lady who apparently knew Celica's mother. Of course, Celica's mother married King Lima of Zofia, but she she was kind of forced to do it. She didn't really want to do it, and apparently she got a pretty bad sickness one day, and she did give birth to Celica, but died shortly after. Either way, this little lady here has a circlet that is meant to prove that Celica is in fact the royal princess of Zofia, so Celica puts it on and promotes to the princess class. Either way though, Celica has to head to the Mila temple after this, so she deals with a short battle against a tough foe wielding a shadow sword. But either way, eventually Celica gets up to Mila's gate, and it's overrun by the Duma cult, and the Arcanist Mikhail can summon gargoyles to constantly pepper Celica's army, and it's very annoying. There are also some other, Duma cult members inside, and a couple snipers, but either way though, Celica and friends just have to trudge through this, and eventually they'll breach the ruined Mila temple, and eventually defeat Mikhail and all the other members of that bad faction up north. But once Celica and friends actually take the time to go inside the shrine properly, they realized that it's mostly in ruin and that Mila isn't there, and obviously Celica is confused as to what could happen, and eventually one of the people tells Celica that basically Emperor Rudolph of Rigel came and sealed Mila within the falchion, and so that's I guess the explanation as to why everything in Zofia has gone barren, since Mila is an Earth Mother of the land. But either way though, it wasn't really looking good for Celica and friends. Either way, Celica stored up on some of the local treasure, and then she went on her way down to the sluice gate, where she met with the operator, and she proved she was of, Zofian royal lineage, so to speak, and he let the sluice gate flow. Apparently, Rigel had been planning to flood Zofia by letting the water build up in the sluice gate, and eventually would release onto the land and completely soak it, and obviously mess stuff up. But luckily, Celica and friends got there in time enough. So both sluice gates are opened, and the water flows freely, and the land is passable. And also, Noma happens to be there for some reason. He's somehow able traveled nearly half the continent in order to catch up to Celica and friends. But either way, he'll join. And after this, that's officially the end of Act 3, and we're on to Act 4, where obviously Ulm wants to defeat the Rigelian Emperor, Rudolph, and Celica wants to find out where Mila's gone, and she wants to head towards Duma Tower, where she believes there will be answers. But yes, here in Act 4 we'll follow Celica's journey first. So first she deals with crossing the swamp here against some cantors, guys who can summon, undead zombies as well as gargoyles. But either way though, they eventually deal with some more necro dragons and stuff, and eventually they get to Dolth Keep, and Dolth can actually summon necro dragons as a cantor. It's really annoying, but after defeating both the swamp and Dolth and everything, eventually they use the passage underneath Dolth's Keep to enter the Lost Treescape, and the Lost Treescape is an area that is hard to traverse. There are also some enemies there, some random cult members and illusions, but either way though, eventually you can find some treasure, and also eventually get to the village nearby, and the village contains the Great Sage, and the Great Sage, he used to be a bishop of Duma, but obviously he has since been leaving that life behind, and now he lives here with a lot of wisdom and magical prowess, and basically he allows Celica to send Ulm some help. So the Great Sage sends Ulm the ability to promote at the Mila Shrine to the hero class. So that obviously is nice, but either way, Celica has to leave, and eventually she heads north and deals with the enemy inside the fortress, and then on the left, she finally confronts Duma in a swamp, and Jeddah. Jeddah, of course, being the Archbishop of the Duma cult. He has some weird invincibility, a spell around him, so he can only be hurt on turns 4, 8, and 12. But either way, whether or not Celica defeats him or not, it's meaningless, as Jeddah has too much power right now, and he ultimately tells Celica to meet him at the top of Duma Tower. So Celica and friends eventually arrive at Duma Tower, and they fight a bunch of illusions, specters, that they're pretty tough, and obviously Celica and friends need to make sure they're well prepared in order to get to the absolute top. But either way though, Jeddah is waiting at the top, and basically what he wants to do is drain all the life force out of Celica and friends and give it to Lord Duma to make him even stronger. But for now, Celica is in the waiting room, and all she can do is watch Alm and friends continue their struggle in the west of the continent. So over on Alm's side, he has to deal with his first wave of Regalian soldiers, and eventually he gets to an interesting point. He has to face General Jerome, but also among General Jerome's ranks is a knight named Zeke, who's clearly very honorable. Now, if you rescued Zeke's lover, Tatiana, from the Arcanist Nui Baba, over on, Nui Baba's mansion, which is on top of Fear Mountain, then you can rescue Tatiana and also deal with Nui Baba. And Nui Baba is generally a nuisance on the land. He makes witches, out of young girls, so to speak, and he's just generally not a pleasant person. But either way, once you free Tatiana, she can talk to Zeke, and Zeke can be persuaded to betray General Jerome, who is General Jerome is quite harsh on the people of Rigel and the local villagers. So Zeke is glad to help Alm and friends take him out, and then afterwards you can visit Zeke in the village, and Zeke is unwilling to betray Rigel himself, as Emperor Rudolph actually found Zeke washed up ashore on the Rigel coast, and gave him a new name and a new home in Rigel, instead of just branding him, some kind of spy or traitor or whatever. And obviously Zeke is very thankful, but eventually Zeke notices the mark on Alm's hand. Apparently this thing called the brand, it's very important, and Zeke was told by Emperor Rudolph that anyone who bore the brand, if he happened to come across them, then he was to join their forces. So Zeke actually joins Alm's forces. And this adds another, layer of mystery of just who exactly Alm is. But either way, though, they eventually deal with some more battles further north, but eventually they come into an impasse. There's an earthquake that stops Alm's progress, and basically it's up to Jeddah to free him, because Jeddah basically has power over the earthquakes, and Celica begs Jeddah to free Alm and friends, and Jeddah obliges, but only if Celica follows him further down into the dungeon, where he plans to sacrifice all of them to Lord Duma. So eventually Jeddah gets all of them down to the bottom of the dungeon, and Alm is free to continue about the rest of his journey. So he deals with a couple of battles on Rigel Falls, and then the Five-Fingered Fortress, and eventually gets to Rigel Castle, where Emperor Rudolph is waiting for him. And Emperor Rudolph says something interesting, that if he happens to be defeated, then everyone else should just surrender. And it's this battle where it's basically a long funeral march for Emperor Rudolph, as he pretty much expects to die in this battle. And that being said, he still puts up a good fight. He's still very strong, but ultimately he is eventually defeated, and this is where he reveals to Alm that Alm is in fact his son. And basically, Alm was placed under the care of General Myson in Ram Village, all the way on the other side of the continent. So he obviously wasn't, people wouldn't learn who he was, and obviously Alm being the heir to the throne, he would have a huge target on his back, so his birth was pretty much kept a secret. And this was a necessary precaution. And basically Rudolph realized that Duma was going mad, and there wasn't much he could do to reverse the course of Duma and his fate, so ultimately he knew he had to leave the fate of the continent in Alm's hands, and he's glad to have died by Alm's hands here. But either way though, Emperor Rudolph falls, and technically Alm is now the king of Rigel, though he still has the unfortunate task of taking down Duma. But either way, that's the end of Act 4, and we head on to Act 5, where Ulm uses the underground passage to Duma Tower, and eventually gets to save Celica and the rest of the continent, hopefully. So Ulm enters the underground passageway, and along the way he does have to fight some monsters, some of which are fairly difficult, more difficult than usual, generally speaking, but either way though, obviously Ulm and the rest of his army here, they try their best, and in the meantime Celica's army is down in the little dungeon fighting for their life against monsters that Jeddah and Duma have summoned. And it's not looking good, so you'll want to hurry up with Ulm, otherwise Celica's army will lose HP. But either way, eventually once you get through, near the end, there are a couple of big doors, and inside, only Ulm can go inside these doors, and Ulm has to fight some monsters by himself. And they include a few dragons, and they're somewhat strong, but Ulm hopefully is very strong by this point in the game, and once Ulm defeats all of these enemies, he eventually gets to the end, and there's a chest that contains the falchion. Though Milla's body is nowhere to be found, obviously, as she was sealed inside the falchion. But either way, though, this falchion, it's not the same as Mars falchion, FYI, but it's what is needed to defeat Duma. So Ulm exits the little doors, and eventually he reaches the end of the dungeon by falling through a bunch of holes, and he rendezvous with Celica, and together the armies join their forces and hopefully have enough strength to defeat both Jeddah and Duma. But either way, the enemies here, they're very tough. There's a bunch of flying eyeballs, there's some really powerful specters, but either way, once you slog through all of them, eventually you'll cross the little swamp and get to Duma, and you must deal the final blow with Ulm and the falchion. And afterwards, Duma, finally escaping from his madness, speaks to Ulm and basically tells him never to let these events repeat ever again, and Duma says to carry both, Duma's power and, despising for corruption, as well as Milla's general love and caringness, and combine it into a new nation, and presumably Ulm is to be the ruler of this new united Valencia, and then character endings, and then of course Ulm and Celica, I guess they hash out their differences and get married at the end of the story. So that's the end of Fire Emblem Guided. This game certainly, I guess, was different. I mean, obviously it had even less dialogue than the previous game, but I guess it made it, count a little bit more, and generally wasn't as much filler and stuff, and obviously there are a number of battles that just didn't have any dialogue at all, but I guess all those extra little battles gave better scale and general depth in that aspect, and it obviously felt more like a proper, journey, a proper, lengthy, type of ordeal, of conflict, so to speak, and I guess it definitely does, that type of thing better. But either way, though, as for the actual story dialogue that was given, well, there's not a ton to go off of, but we can pretty much assume that Ulm and Celica obviously meant to be embodiments of both Duma and Milla. Somewhat, they did feel very strongly about what they believed in, it did create a little bit of an interesting contrast, but ultimately, though, even though they felt strongly in different ways, ultimately, though, they all ended up at the same place in the end, and, even if their goals were very idealistic, ultimately they still ended up in the same dark dungeon at the bottom of the pit, fighting off the exact same monsters, so to speak. And I guess that's sort of cool how it is sort of all connected in that way, but there's not much more to say beyond that. I mean, it is a cute little tale, but obviously it's still not quite meant to be the super grand thing like we may get later on in the series. But either way, though, yeah, you probably need to upgrade to the SNES as soon as possible, and luckily that's what the next game does. But yeah, I guess we'll talk about the music a little bit. It's certainly an improvement over the previous game. Yeah, the beats just kind of go a little bit harder, I guess. And yeah, obviously you have the map themes, like the Act 1 theme, the Act 2 theme. They're very unique, and Act 2's map theme is very beautiful. And of course, with Noah's Divine Protection, it's a very nicely composed song. And yeah, it's very iconic. But of course, there's also Truth, which is pretty nice as well, and some of the dungeon themes. But of course, by far the most standout track in this game, at least in regards to emotions, is of course Land of Sorrow. And yeah, there's no words really needed to describe this song, but you know, it definitely represents something. But either way, though, that untapped emotion wouldn't quite fully come out in this series just yet, and it would take a little bit for it to fully, realize itself. But either way, there's a step in the right direction with the next game, Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem. And as for this game, it's still kind of clunky and not super fun to control, but whatever.